Let's talk.
John Brown.
The Devil's Horsemen, 1,000 years of conquest by Eurasian steppe horse archers. Now, this might seem some of you scratching your heads, but my little heart sang with joy when this one crashed onto my desk because, as I was just saying to my first guest off air, I'm probably the only person that I know has got an unhealthy interest in the Scythians and the composite bow. Delighted to welcome onto the show, Jem. Now, can I get your surname right? Because I hate to get it wrong. Jem, what is your surname, please? Jem, sorry, I missed that completely in my excitement when I hit the wrong fader. How do you...
fine.
Yeah, what's your... Go on, off we go.
It's Jem Ducucu.
I was right the first time round. Now, for those who don't know, and shame upon you if you don't already, because once you think about the steppe, we've got Attila, Genghis. It seems to be an awful lot of people rampaging across the steppe, but we don't actually realise how... And here comes the stupid quote of the way, how absolutely huge the steppe is. So take it away, please, and give us the countryside 101 for a start.
Well, I'm so pleased that I'm talking to the only other person who cares about the Scythians.
Listen, if it upsets the Greek historians, I'm all up for it. Don't worry about that. Put the fear of what's
Right. Okay. So. To put this into context, what's known as the Eurasian steppe, it starts just north of China on the Pacific coast. It then stretches like a gigantic ocean of grass across the entire Asiatic landscape. So it goes through Central Asia, the places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan that you can never find on a map, lots of southern Russia as well. It then stretches on into Western Russia, then on into Ukraine, and then it finally finishes in modern-day Hungary, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. So it is this huge area where there aren't impassable rivers or gigantic mountain ranges that you can't get around. And what it leads to is this nomadic lifestyle. These people who live on horses, that live in tents, that just travel around the area. They follow their livestock around. There's no need for fences or farming. We just follow the goats or the camels or the yaks, and we're on horseback, and we're a very mobile society. And what has happened is over the 1,000+ years is these groups sometimes coalesce together and then bump into settled societies. And when they do arrive, there's tends to be an awful lot of bloodshed, but they get names. They get named by the locals. So they might be called the Huns or the Scythians or the Magyars, or it could be the Turks or the Mongols. They've got all these different names. Of course, these names aren't even remotely similar to each other, which is a sign that they've been named by other civilizations rather than by their own linguistical languages.
It's a really interesting point, and it also says an awful lot of what I have to say about civilization. And I'll come on to this in a point. And because if you don't have a natural barrier, i.e. you don't have a mountain range, you don't have, the Rhine, which is keeping the Germanic tribes in check, then you are free to roam. There is nobody who's going to muck with you. And if you're a nomadic civilization, there is no need to build cities per se, permanent structures, because you go where your animals go. And so therefore, is it almost like looking at them as almost pirates of the steppes, because they just roam where they want to. There's this undulating, because this is the sort of thing that in North America the North American tribes will do. The Sioux and
absolutely yes,
that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's, I think, a perfect comparison, although it is worth pointing out that the horse was introduced by the Europeans. So your idea of the Sioux or Comanche on the back of a horse, that was actually a period of only about 100 years of their culture. They were forced into that plain living. But funnily enough, independently, they didn't sit down and read books about the Mongols, but it turned out that they ended up doing exactly the same kind of lifestyle as these people across Eurasia for 1,000+ years, and you're quite right. It therefore leads to a very different understanding of society and culture. The family unit is even more important because you have to support each other. You have to work together to put up your tent. But also it means when these civilizations crashed into ancient China or medieval Europe, They didn't understand what a peasant was. These human beings are scrabbling around in the dirt and muck. They seem to have no money whatsoever. Get a grip with yourself, man. Have some dignity. We'll do you a favor. We will now murder you and your family.
I was going to it's just got my point of civilization. You preempted me, Jem, because I was about to say, because in a civilization that isn't fuel, it doesn't need landowners or people working the land. The steppe people have never come into contact with them, and so they go, well, who are these? What are these people for? And spoiler alert, that is, you're off to, in true Game of Thrones Red Wedding style, you're off to meet your maker. And this obviously puts the fear of the proverbial into, God-fearing Western civilizations, but also, going into China. I mean, this is the reason we have the Great Wall of China, for goodness sake.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. Some people say, well, the thing about these people is they were exceptional on the battlefield. If you've got, you have almost been born in the saddle. These are the best horsemen in the world. And you mentioned the composite bow. Let's just quickly do a sidestep on the technology there. The best bow in history is the long bow, created by the Welsh and used very effectively by the English against the French. They were effective to over half a mile. Closer up, they could pierce steel armor. But the problem is you have to practice again and again with a long bow, and you have to be standing still to fire one. You can't fire one from the back of a horse. So when we hear about bowmen in like the Roman era, a short bow probably had an effective range of about 100 yards. They certainly couldn't pierce armor. So actually bows were pretty rudimentary for most of history. And the shape of a bow is what you've got in your head. A normal bow, it's like a capital letter D. Whereas a composite bow is a composition. It's not one piece of wood. It's usually horn and wood carefully glued and fused together, which gives it more flex. It gives it more pulling power, and there's an extra curve in it. It kind of looks like a capital W. And therefore, because of that, while it doesn't quite have the same range or penetrating power as a longbow, it's pretty close. But the huge advantage is you can fire it from the back of a horse.
And that's the thing, because previously archers have been used as static formation, and hit and run is the tactic. They won't stand still, these accursed Scythians or wherever, and they don't, and the legions or whoever, the Greeks, don't know how to deal with this, because they're used to people standing. There's an order of battle, and this lot won't stand still, and it's great numbers charging around. Are they using stirrups by the time of this book? Because that's an important point. Are they stirrups?
Yes.
I think that's an Assyrian. Here we go, even further back. Sorry, ancient history fans. Because it's the Assyrians. The Assyrians are into this, aren't they? So
yes. So we're talking about for those of you who aren't into now, look, Giles, you and I are talking the same language.
Should we get the anoraks out right already?
But for the casual reader, and if you like, this is the point of the Devil's Horsemen.
Yeah.
There's basically only been one book before that sort of pulled them all together into the story of these people. This is the second time, but the first book was a very academic tome. I am very much aware of the fact that the readers will be, I've just read a book on World War II. Ooh, I fancy something called The Devil's Horsemen. So I do my best to try and put it into modern day context. So the Assyrians, Parthians, they're in modern day Iran. And guess what? The north of Iran is on the edge of this Eurasian steppe. So they invented the stirrup. So again, earlier civilizations had cavalry, but without the stirrup, a horse isn't as maneuverable. But once you've invented the stirrup, you can basically get a horse to turn around on a £5 note. And therefore, as you just described beautifully, these men would charge up. So you think, brace for impact, group together. That's the right way to withstand a charge. But right at the last moment, they would wheel around and charge away again, all this time firing arrows at you. So you're clumped together, perfect target for arrows. But then they charging away from you. I still can't hit you, and I'm still being peppered by arrows, but also it looks like they're retreating. So let's all run forwards. And now we're going to get surrounded by a gigantic ring of these horse archers who are going to keep riding round us, peppering us with arrows out of danger's range. And we're slowly being whittled down to nothing, which is again why you get this concept of the horde, this just these unknowable numbers of these barbarians coming from the east. No, they weren't. There weren't that many of them, but if they keep riding backwards and forwards, they're very hard to count. So they create inadvertently through their military tactics, their own myths, but just what started this was the Great Wall of China. Great on a battlefield. A horse is incredibly mobile, but notoriously horses are bad at climbing ladders. So they suck at doing any kind of siege.
That's my quote of the day, by the way, that one. Thank you very much. There we go. Yeah. So.
I am factually not wrong there. Yeah, the early groups of these people, if they ever did attack a walled city, the only option they had was to surround it and starve it into submission. Going into a later group, the Turks, a lot of people think the Turks are Arabic. They're not. They were just as scary invaders from an unknown territory to the Middle East as the Huns were smashing into the Roman Empire. So the Turks at the beginning of their story were besieging cities and just starving them into submission. And there was one in modern day Turkey that took them 7 years to capture just purely through grinding them down. But the Turks create their own civilization, the Ottomans, and by 1453, they've adopted the local customs, and you've now got cannons breaking down the walls of Constantinople. So these people, some of these groups ended up just settling in an area and going native in inverted commas. Like, for example, the Huns found Hungary in modern day Europe, but in Hungary, they don't speak Hungarian, they speak Magyar. Yeah. And that is 400 years later, another group of these horsemen who arrive, who bring their language into an area where the local horsemen now are living in cities and farming. And so they became susceptible to the conquest tactics that their ancestors had used centuries earlier.
And also the other thing is halfway through, they go from being these sort of, anybody's seen The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas, they go from this shamanistic, he's smiling even more now, this shamanistic believing people, and they've converted to Islam, which puts the absolute willies up everybody else who's up the Franks, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first became aware of this impact, I was back at university. I have a degree in archaeology and medieval history. And I've always been fascinated by the Crusades. And actually, full disclosure, so just over 10 years ago, Amberley is my publisher of this book, and Amberley is my regular publisher. I've got a big shout out to Phil, who I know is listening to this. Phil's the guy who organized this. Thank you very much, Phil. Philip, I should say Philip.
No, it's all right.
Anyway, so my first book with them was a concise history of the Crusades called Deus Vult. But what I was aware is while everybody thinks of the Crusades as this titanic clash between Christians and Muslims, actually the game changer late in the Middle Ages in the Middle East for the Crusades was the Mongols. Yeah. And for a while, the Mongols were beating the Muslims, but the Mongols had also crashed into Europe, hence why they were called the Devil's Horsemen. But right at the end, around about 1300, the Mongols reinvade the Middle East and they capture Jerusalem. So there is this theory, they're pagans, they will give us Jerusalem back. But by then, the Mongols, that particular group of Mongols had converted to Islam. So they understood Jerusalem from the context of it being a religious city from an Islamic perspective rather than just pagans capturing another city.
Are we going to go down the route of Seljuk Turks here and really lose the audiences? I've just got a message in from some of the listeners saying, quote unquote, you're going to love this, saying this conversation sounds as if you're chatting to your mental twin. So, now let's just talk about, because people talk about Alexander the Great. And, obviously, I mentioned the Scythians, and I'll only mention them one more time at the end. But, they say, he never lost a battle in, 8 years?
8 years.
But Tamburlaine, there is a leader who absolutely has the no holds barred record, the Champions League. Tell me more, Jem.
Thank you. So, what I noticed is sort of every couple of 100 years or so, obviously history is never quite that neat, but it does seem that every couple of 100 years, these groups get together and cause massive damage across the whole of civilization. What I love telling people is like, by the time you finish reading my book, empires will rise and fall and millions of people will be dead. Okay. So, and the world will never be the same again. But right at the end of this, we get, in the late 1300s, a guy called Timur. And very early on in his career, he's a very poor man. He ends up stealing some sheep, and the shepherd's trying to protect his flock and fires a couple of arrows at Timur. It takes off a couple of one arrow takes off a couple of fingers off one hand, and the other one hits him in the spine. And so he is paralyzed down one side of his body. And so he was referred to in his own lifetime by his own people as Emir Timur, but he became known in the West as Timur the Lame, which gets turned into English Tamerlane.
Right.
He was never called that, and if you said that to his face, he probably would have chopped your head off. But, Alexander the Great, he was undefeated in 8 years, and he conquered most of the known world. Tamerlane did the same thing over 30 years, and he did it paralyzed down one side of his body. So we need to give a lot more respect to Tamerlane. I think it is very hard to argue otherwise once you see what he does. He's the greatest general in history. He's got these horse archers, and perhaps my favorite example is at the Battle of Delhi. He gets into India.
Yeah. He
fights Delhi and the Sultanate of Delhi. One of the things they've got is armor-plated war elephants. So, come on, guys.
As you do. Let's not muck around here.
Do you not want to read a book that's got armor-plated war elephants in it, guys? Come on. But anyway, the problem is horses are scared of elephants. They won't charge them. And that's a real problem when pretty much your entire army is cavalry. So he comes up with one of the greatest strategies in military history. He uses his brain, not his brawns, because he knew that the one thing that all animals are scared of is fire. So what he did is he got from his baggage train, he got all the camels and he packed on their back bales of straw and hay and twigs, and he set fire to them. Camels, not being the smartest animals in the world, don't realize they're strapped to the fire, but they start running, and they run away from the fire, i.e. straight towards the Indian army. The elephants see this wall of fire coming towards them. They panic and they start trampling their own soldiers. And then basically what could have been a really hard fight for Tamerlane is over before it's even started. Plus, I'm going to argue that he invents the first mobile barbecue, as they could have sat there and eaten roast camel at the end of the battle. You see,
the Battle of Delhi is basically battle by Tamerlane, but obviously directed by Salvador Dali. Metallic elephants and flaming camels. All we needed was some melting clocks, and we would have been in. Okay, let's get back before we go completely anarchish. How do you do a history? Because obviously these are nomadic tribes. Do they, civilization as we think is not the same. So are there scribes? Because there certainly aren't monks writing this in Lindisfarne, are there?
Yeah, no, you raise a really good point, and I do a big section in it about my most hated phrase, and people will say this in the pub to sound smart, is history's written by the victors. Sometimes, occasionally it is, like if we're talking about the Roman conquest of Britain, but the vast majority of the time, it's rubbish. And these guys prove it, because Attila the Hun and the early Seljuk Turks and the Avars and even the Mongols, these are cultures that did not write down things. We learn, and indeed unrelated to this, but another example, the Vikings, semi-literate society where all of these their stories have been written down, who are at the sharp end of their swords. And so, I'll be honest with you, the first couple of chapters are a bit of a slow burn because I have to lean on archaeology, lean on fragmentary sources. But as the book goes along, we got firmer and firmer details. But even at the time of Tamerlane, there's a multi-year fight against one of the great Mongol hordes led by Tokhtamesh, where we know that there was this titanic clash across thousands of miles of Asia, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting, and we've got almost no information on it. It was the biggest war in the world at that time, and yet we know less about it than the Battle of Agincourt, which by comparison was a sideshow to what was going on.
Static, etc. Right, I've got 3 minutes, so let me try and get these certain points. Right, okay. So, if it's not for the Mongol hordes, sorry, spoiler alert, the Scythians again, we don't get Amazon warriors. Herodotus, explain how, because they become basically, who are these like these shamanistic people, and my goodness, look at that woman over there, because they don't have them in Greek society, and the women in this society are very much as equal as the men in some cases, Jem.
Yes, the simple answer to that is yes, women are high status, although high status men would have multiple wives. But at the time of Genghis Khan, which, by the way, not a name, that's a title. His real name was Temujin. But his mother, incredibly important and in the court of this gigantic empire. And later on, I love this story. I do put a warning. This was written down by Marco Polo, may not be true, but he talks about a Mongolian princess called Kutulan who says, I will marry the man who can beat me in wrestling. If you win, you get my hand in marriage. If you lose, you give me 100 horses, because this is a culture which associates horses with wealth. By the end of her career as a wrestler, she wins 10,000 horses. And in the end, she can't find any man to beat her in wrestling hand to hand. And so she ends up going, all right, I'll pick you. And clearly, she's the one who wears the trousers in that relationship.
Yeah.
So, these are where you get these incredibly strong, powerful women.
Wonderful. Right then, I've got 1 minute and 50 seconds, right? So first of all, where can people find you online, Jem, if they want to find out?
Well, Jem Ducucu, that's Duducu. Pretty easy to find. JEM. I'm on the Twitters. I'm on the Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. So that's where you can find me. The Devil's Horseman's available wherever you want.
You can order it via our own. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Just click on the link, which you can do. All right,
there you go, everybody.
And right now, last thing, because I've got 1 minute and 24 hit the news, because you've just pushed, and this is showing that basically we are brothers from another mother, obviously at some point. But you mentioned Crusader states, right? I'm just about to go down Antioch, I'm going to go down Edessa, I'm going to go down all that Acre, but Battle of Hattin. What happens in the Battle of Hattin?
One of the most important battles in history.
The tactics.
So basically,
they run away.
So if you like, this is the problem during the Crusades and working with the Turks. The Europeans had heavy cavalry. If you can corner the enemy, it's like a hot knife through butter. But if you can't corner the enemy, that mobile horse archers just go round and round and round you and whittle you down. That happens again and again in history.
Indeed. The book is called The Devil's Horsemen. Guess what? This is my book of the year. So therefore, go forth and order it by the bookshop. Jem, I'm going to get you back on this show, and we're going to go deep diving in the Crusader states, and I don't care if anybody else is listening, because I have found my bleeding historical soulmate. The book is called The Devil's Horseman, 1,000 Years of Conquest by Eurasian Steppe Horses. Don't call him Genghis to his face, whatever you do. Jem, as you can tell, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning, and I'm going to speak to you. We'll get you back on the show very, very soon.
Likewise, thank you.